Jeep has long been synonymous with off-road culture, and today, two main vehicles uphold that reputation: the Wrangler and the Gladiator. The Wrangler is a compact SUV that looks like a little buggy, and the Gladiator is the new Wrangler-based mid-sized truck. The Wrangler and the Gladiator are ready to go off-road from the factory, but the cars you see on the screen are doing more than just off-roading. They'll soon be racing across the desert, and to do that, they have some survival modifications. Today, we're going to find out what it takes to get a car ready for 1,500 miles through the middle of nowhere.
This is the 2021 Jeep Wrangler Sport. That is the 2020 Jeep Gladiator Rubicon, and I'm Alanis King. We're in Michigan with automotive supplier Magna, a new partner for the YouTube channel, and they tossed us the keys to these street-legal but race-ready off-road Jeeps for the day. These Jeeps will soon race more than 1,500 miles through the American desert, and today we're going to explore what makes them up for that task, both their normal equipment and some added-on extras. So let's go for a drive and find out what survival Jeeps are all about.
Jeep has a long history of utilitarian, off-road capable, Army-style vehicles, because that's where it all began. Back in 1940, during World War II, the U.S. military wanted a new light reconnaissance vehicle. When the U.S. government wants new vehicles, manufacturers get to compete for giant, high-dollar contracts to produce them. A recent example of this is the new U.S. Postal Service vehicle contract, which will likely be worth billions of American dollars. In 1940, the U.S. military invited 135 manufacturers to design a new survey vehicle, and 3 entered the competition: Willys Overland, American Bantam Car Manufacturing, and Ford Motor Company. Willys Overland built about 400,000 vehicles in its contract, and the company trademarked the Jeep name to begin offering a Jeep civilian vehicle, which eventually led us to where we are today.
Jeep's entire brand image, especially for more hardcore vehicles like the Gladiator and the Wrangler, is based on its off-road and outdoor recreation heritage. The cool thing about an off-road vehicle is that you can just buy it and take it on the trails, or you can beef it up with a bunch of modifications and take it on even harder trails. That's kind of the beauty of any car. You can just make it your own.
The Jeep Wrangler name began in 1987. The Wrangler was the successor to Jeep's CJ series, and the goal was for the Wrangler to offer buyers the same small four-wheel drive utility, but with more creature comforts. The Wrangler nameplate has been through 4 generations since. The current Wrangler generation is called the JL, and it debuted in 2017. That's the generation this Wrangler is from.
In terms of technology, the JL generation of the Wrangler has been pretty major. Not only does this generation include the most powerful Wrangler ever with the 470 horsepower Rubicon 392, but it also has the first ever plug-in hybrid Wrangler with the 4xe, which gets 49 mpge in 2024. There are a bunch of different powertrains available on the JL Wrangler, and this is a 2021 sport trim with a 2-liter inline 4-cylinder engine that makes 270 horsepower and 295 pound-feet of torque. A couple interesting things in this engine bay is that we have a physical dipstick over there that I can't reach, and added for the Rally is this light box right here that has all the relay switches for the auxiliary lights, and it also has a circuit board. So if you're running these auxiliary lights and you cut the engine off, this little box will cut those lights off before your battery dies. All this power goes through an 8-speed automatic transmission to all 4 wheels. Magna supplies the transfer case on this Wrangler Sport, which splits the engine torque between the front and the rear axles. There are also a couple of Rubicon off-road specific features on this Rally build, like a 2-inch suspension lift, these 33-inch tires, and then we have this bonus up front, a more hardcore front bumper with a winch in case you get stuck somewhere.
The modern Jeep Gladiator is a pickup based on the Wrangler, and the name may seem new if you're young or aren't a big Jeep history buff, but it's actually not. The Gladiator debuted in 1963, and it was also called the J-Series pickup. Back then, Jeep based the Gladiator off the Wagoneer full-size SUV, and transmission options included a 3-speed automatic. 3 whole speeds!
Jeep revived the Gladiator nameplate in 2018 and offered it with either an 8-speed automatic or a 6-speed manual transmission, which is pretty awesome because in America you do not see a lot of manual trucks anymore. This 2020 Gladiator is from the Rubicon trim, and it has a 3.6-liter Pentastar V6 engine that makes 285 horsepower and 260 pound-feet of torque. All that goes through an 8-speed automatic transmission, unfortunately not the manual, to all 4 wheels. On this truck, we have what's called electric locking differentials. A differential is what allows your wheels to spin at different speeds, because when you take a turn, one wheel needs to go further than the other, so it needs to spin more. Most vehicles on the road have what's called an open differential, but the problem when off-roading with an open differential is that if one of your wheels is on the ground and the other is in a low traction situation, like being off the ground, your vehicle will just spin that wheel with an open differential. A locking differential allows your vehicles to move in lockstep on that axle. So if you have one with a bunch of traction and one without, they can just move like this and you can move forward. So when you have that electric locking differential, you just lock it and get out of whatever tricky situation you're in. These Jeeps aren't meant for weekend trips. They are meant to survive 8 days in the desert with the Rebelle Rally, and each of those days is 10 to 12 hours long. Competitors in the Rebelle Rally can't use GPS or internet-enabled devices. They are using maps and compasses, and they're pretty much on their own, except for the help they can get from each other. The vehicles used in the Rebelle Rally are street legal, and they're OEM with a few extra parts on them to make them even better for off-roading. On both of these cars, Magna added steel bumpers to help with extraction, extra storage racks, auxiliary LEDs for night driving, skid plates to protect the underbody in case there's contact with rocks or the ground, a rally computer, and a bunch of survival equipment like 5-gallon water containers, survival and first aid kits, tents and helmets, recovery straps, shovels, and more. But my favorite add-on is this 2x4, because you can use a 2x4 for anything. On the Wrangler specifically, Magna added these rock sliders with jack points so you can lift the car up even more if you need to. And on both of them, the rally computers inside just show you time over distance. You are not going to be logging on Twitter in there. Neither of these Jeeps are new, and both of them have modifications, but just to give you some context, they represent different ends of the Jeep trim spectrum. We start with the Wrangler Sport, which in 2021, which this vehicle is, started at less than $30,000. This is the base trim on the Wrangler. And the Gladiator Rubicon back there in 2020 started at $45,000 because the Rubicon is near the top of the ladder. And that brings us to my favorite part of any car video. How many Atlantises can fit in this 2020 Jeep Gladiator Rubicon's truck bed? We're not getting in the Wrangler because these things are prepared to go off-road, and frankly, there's not room for me in there. So, with all the equipment in here, if we had 2 Atlantises facing each other, they could squeeze right here at the back. It's time to drive the rally Jeeps, and we're starting with the Wrangler. We're gonna start off with a few interior impressions in here. And remember, this is the Wrangler Sport, so it is the base trim of this vehicle. And it is so simple in here. I actually love it. You have a push to start button, but you have crank windows. And it's really awesome to be in a modern vehicle that has such a not modern feature in it. Another thing I love about the inside of this Wrangler is that the gauges are black and orange. They have a lot of contrast on them, and they have this funky font that just makes you excited to drive the vehicle. Keeping with the nature of the budget Wrangler, This car has the smallest infotainment screen I have ever seen in a modern car. It is smaller than my hand. I can fully cover it with my hand, and it is hilarious to be able to do that. Not only that, but I have cloth seats behind me, and I also have these very hard plastic door cards next to me, which is to be expected in a vehicle of this price and trim. There are also tons of physical buttons in this Wrangler, physical buttons everywhere. And the dials have this rubbery material around them that make them really satisfying to turn. You wouldn't expect them to be super satisfying in a base model Wrangler, but it is really nice to turn those dials. I've never driven a Wrangler before. I've driven the Bronco, but I have not been in the Wrangler. And it really surprised me how thin the pillars are in this car, and also how thin the area in front of the dashboard is. Usually when you're in a vehicle, you have this massive dashboard in front of you where you could literally just put manila folders everywhere in front of you. And that is not the case up here. It's a very thin dashboard. All the pillars are super thin, and you have these great views all around you, aside from the off-road equipment, of course, because we've got a bunch of off-road equipment on this one. And probably my favorite thing about off-roaders like the Wrangler or the Bronco is that the roof is just a few twists away from coming off. You have this hard top up here that makes a really metally nice sound, but you can just twist the little knobs holding it in and just push it off. It's amazing. Now let's do some quick driving impressions on the Wrangler. Everybody will always tell you that driving a Wrangler off-road feels great. Driving a Wrangler on the highway does not. I do not have time to take this Wrangler on the highway right now. We are limited to some residential normal streets, but hey, we're gonna feel how it drives anyway. I'm actually really enjoying the accelerator pedal on this Wrangler. It's really jumpy and it's loud when it accelerates, so I'm having fun with it. There is a little bit of a delay, so it's jumpy. If you don't give it a ton of gas, it'll jump a little bit. But if you floor it, there is an actual waiting period before it does anything. You floor it all the way and then it goes, which is totally fine and normal for an off-roader. I mean, if you're driving this car off-road, you're mostly going to do those slower rock crawls and things like that, which is what something like a Jeep Wrangler is really good for. The steering naturally isn't twitchy. This is an off-roader. The steering is a little more laid back. When I put in an input, it responds a little bit afterward. And there's some wind noise in this ear, but there's a ton over here because that window is down, and I literally cannot crank it back up because I cannot reach the hand crank. The 2-inch lift here really does make a difference. I feel like I am super high up, but also not like I'm driving a bus. And I think I don't feel like I'm driving a bus because of the fact that all of these pillars and the dashboard are super thin. I just feel like I'm driving something with a lot of views, like a fishbowl kinda. It's nice. And something I find interesting about any off-road vehicle, like a Wrangler or a Ford Bronco or a Chevy Colorado ZR2 Bison, any of those vehicles meant to go hardcore off-road, is that you can feel the road under you. You can feel the bumps, you can feel the changes in the road and the surface. But those bumps stop, so I feel them in my legs, and then they get absorbed around that leg level, and they don't make it to my head where my head just shakes back and forth. It's really interesting to feel those bumps just totally stop. And now, because we got two cars in one video, we're gonna swap over for some quick Gladiator driving impressions. We have now swapped inside the Gladiator Rubicon, which you can immediately tell is a much more expensive vehicle. First, because we have power windows, which honestly isn't as cool because every car has power windows. I would rather have a brand new car that you just have to crank the window on. In theory, not in practice. Because when you actually have to crank the window in practice, you're like, oh, I have to crank this window, don't I? The Gladiator Rubicon has nicer materials in here. We have this leather textured seat back here instead of the cloth, and there are red accents everywhere. So where we had orange in the gauges of the Wrangler Sport, we have red in the Gladiator Rubicon. We also have this red dashboard and red accent stitching and little red things everywhere. You still have the rubberized dials, which, oh, I really like how those dials feel. They're just very, very nice. And you still have this big, nice, wide view of everything. You have the thin little pillars, the thin little dashboard, albeit the material's nicer on this dashboard. And you can just see a lot, which is super nice. And I feel like I'm so high up and I can see the world. We also, like on the Wrangler, have this removable hardtop roof, which just takes a few clicks and it's gone. In terms of actual driving impressions, you can tell when you're in this vehicle that it is more high-end than the Wrangler Sport, which is the base. It just feels a little more insulated from the road. It feels a little more cushy and comfortable and nice. From the seats to the steering wheel to everything, it just feels higher end because it's twice the price. Much like the Wrangler, the steering in this car is laid back. It's a little slow to respond, but I like the tension in the pedals. And when I hit the gas, the Gladiator isn't fast, but it'll pick up and go. It doesn't have that same delay that the Wrangler had. The Wrangler had a delay. When you pressed it, you had to wait a second and then it would go. The Gladiator, I don't feel that. It goes, not super fast, but it goes. But the important thing to remember when you talk about an off-road vehicle and its performance on road is that it's really not meant to perform here. It's meant to perform on the dunes, on the rocks, elsewhere, and the road is just a compromise. There's wind noise in this car, there's road noise in this car. Just like the Wrangler, it absorbs all of those road imperfections around my legs. But when you take this off-road, it will be the king of the world. And that's where you want it to be. That is, ooh, that was kind of fun. That's where you want it to be. That's where you want to show off. On the road, that's just a compromise. What's wild for me to think about is that for me right now, this vehicle is just something I'm driving on the road. I'm not driving it off-road. I'm not driving it for an extended amount of time. I'm driving this for a very, very short period of time. But very soon, the drivers of this car in the Rebelle Rally will be in this Gladiator for 8 days and like 10 hours a day. They're gonna be in here for like 80 hours off-roading, maybe getting stuck somewhere, maybe getting lost, just facing the elements in a vehicle with just each other's company. They're not gonna have their phones, they're not gonna have Wi-Fi, they're not gonna be able to call people or FaceTime people while they're out on the trails. It is truly such a big and unique experience to be able to drive this car for that long and on that harsh of a course. That's pretty cool.
Jeep's legacy began out of necessity. America needed new army vehicles, and Willys made them happen. Now, for people like you and me, Jeeps aren't about necessity. They're about lifestyle. And sometimes that lifestyle leads you to race them 1,500 miles across the desert.
Jeep's whole brand identity centers on its off-road past, present, and future. The Wrangler and the Gladiator are meant to be edge-of-the-world 4x4s from the factory, and they are. These just have a few off-road extras. I'm not competing in the Rebelle Rally this year because that is an adventure for another time, but I know plenty of people who are, and I think they're in good hands.